uh, for for most people. And my plan is to kind of jump into the material. But before I do so, I just want to acknowledge that I am about to puke on you, meaning I'm about to share a lot of information in a little bit of time. So, with that, sometimes people don't have a lot of questions because they're still processing what I've shared, and that's totally fine. Um, the folks at Junior League have all of my contact information, and I actually just sent an email with some handouts that you all can share. But outside of that, if you do have questions, you can either put them in the chat during the training. I'll try to save time at the end of the training um, as we go along. And if there's anything, acronyms or anything that I use that I don't describe just because it's common knowledge to me, please stop me and let me know. But with that, I'm going to jump in. So for those of you that don't know about My Life, My Choice actually came about almost 20 years ago. Back in 2001, a young 16-year-old girl had gone missing from care. Um, Unfortunately, she had a pretty significant trauma history, multiple placements, was in DCF custody, so the Department of Children and Families, and on this particular time had gone missing. And when she didn't return, people really became concerned. Unfortunately, her body was found. And to date, the Boston police have not solved her homicide, but they believe it was likely a buyer or an exploiter that likely murdered this young girl. Um, with that, the Department of Children and Families, really everybody was kind of looking at them saying, how could this happen? But what are you going to do to prevent this from happening to the next? And so with that, DCF got a small pot of money, and our co-founder and executive director, Lisa Goldblatt Grace, was in the field. And essentially, DCF gave her this money, and the goal was to tackle the commercial sexual exploitation of children in Massachusetts. Now, Lisa has been doing this work since then and continues to be the executive director of My Life, My Choice. Well, in 2004, we realized there was another need. At the time, although there were lots of therapeutic mentoring services out there and continue to be, no one at the time was matching adult survivors with young people who had been commercially sexually exploited. And in 2004, Audrey Morrissey, our associate director, became the first survivor in Massachusetts to do so. To date, we serve over 200 kids a year through that survivor mentoring program. We'd serve more if we had more mentors. We're always hiring for that position. But the other reason why our numbers don't skyrocket every year is because we're a service that does not stop at 18. So we often retain our clients for years and years and years. So as long as the young person wants the service and is willing to engage with their mentor, we've had some youth that have been with us 8, 9 years. And so that's a piece of why we're not serving 500 a year through mentoring, is because a lot of kids keep that same person. So one thing I like to start with, whether we're training, providers in the field, social workers, school personnel, even young people, is really setting the tone as to why language is so important. And this first term should give you a reaction, right? Why is a trauma-informed agency working on anti-trafficking efforts using a term like teen prostitute? Well, this is an intentional exercise. So I want us to pause for a second and think of somebody in the community that truly believes this is a choice, that a young person wakes up and makes the decision that this is how they're going to make money. Now, if I were to ask that person that inherently believed those things to describe the teen prostitute, what words or terms do you think that person might use to describe that child? This is not what you think, this is what they might say about this young person. Any ideas? You can unmute, you can put it in the chat. So sometimes we hear things like, um, they are a slut. They are an addict. They are a runaway or a runner. They're problematic. They're difficult. They're dirty, um, promiscuous. In Massachusetts, there's a term called THOT, THOT, and that stands for that hoe over there. And for some of you, these might be like, what? I've never even heard of these things before. But they're relevant in the state. And so if I were to ask the person that truly believed those terms were acceptable to describe this young person. And I said, then, who do you think's responsible for this young person? Who do you think this person's going to call when they think this is happening in their neighborhood or in their community? Any guesses? The police, absolutely. So this is a police problem, right? There's not a concern over what's going to happen to this child or if they're going to get any services. Essentially, I'm going to pick up the phone and call the police to remove the problem. Okay? Hold that thought for a second. Now you can become a trauma-informed individual. And even if you know nothing about this topic, look at the words to describe that second child, commercially sexually exploited. So if you had to think of words or terms that come to mind when you think of this child, what would you say? Any ideas? Vulnerable, absolutely. That's a really great one. Victim, yes, Shannon. So something happens when we change the language, right? This child is seen as a victim. They've been perpetrated, coerced, forced into doing this. This was never a choice, right? Sometimes we'll hear people say traumatized. They'll think of a younger child, maybe someone that's been kidnapped or groomed. Those are all true. And so, who do you think's responsible for the commercially sexually exploited child? Any guesses? Social workers, yes. Parents, yes. School personnel, law enforcement, the courts, pretty much anyone involved with working with that child. So I'll say the community, right? And with commercially sexually exploited children, we know to do this work and do it well, it has to be collaborative. Okay. And I'll talk about the multidisciplinary team response in Massachusetts. But yes, it has to be collaborative. In order to support these young people, we have to essentially put a safety net around them of services and providers that one, see them as a victim, and two, want to support them. And so, what's the difference between these two kids? Absolutely nothing. But when we change the language, right, we change how these young people are seen, if they're even seen as a victim at all, right? And that first term, I think we would all argue, is really stigmatizing, right? And so if we're labeling someone a teen prostitute before we even meet them, I wouldn't want to work with me either, right? Because I've already made a kind of a judgment as to who this young person is. And so when we're going to do this work, when we're going to have conversations or events, or we're at a barbecue in our neighborhood, we need to make sure we're all referring to this with the same trauma informed language. These are commercially sexually exploited children. Choice and consent are never present in the commercial sex industry. Okay. So, what is CSEC? CSEC is an acronym that stands for the Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children. For the purposes of this training, I'm going to focus on those under 18. However, we know that at 18 years old, it doesn't mean trauma disappears, right? So it is likely that some of these young people will relapse back into the life because of years of sexual abuse, trauma, exploitation. Some young people really struggle with low self-worth and self-esteem. And even after they've tried to, get a mainstream job and kind of hold it down and be responsible and kind of manage all the things life throws at us, that thought of like, I'm never going to be more than this constantly weighs on them, right? And they've learned because of sexual abuse, it's not their body or choice, right? This is all I'm good for. And so in Massachusetts and in federal legislation, we see anyone under age 18 as victims, but we know that most of the adults that are out there today are the same children that never found their way out. Okay. We know that some of the earliest signs that a young person is being groomed is this remuneration in the form of something of value to that child. Now that differs. We've had young people that have come home with, a new handbag or new sneakers or new jeans or a cell phone. Sometimes with young girls, we'll see the nails getting done. And I'm not talking about the 13 or 14-year-old that got their nails done, a month and a half ago and it's chipping and it's all coming off. I'm talking about the young person that's getting these done weekly, right? The designs, the gel, it costs a lot of money. Like, who's paying for that? An Uber ride, right? Food. Kids coming back to their home foster placement, congregate care, showing up to school, and they have a story behind it, but something's telling you this just isn't adding up. Okay. These are some of the earliest grooming tactics that an exploiter uses to make this young person feel like this adult cares for them and loves them. The issue is the child is not making the connection yet between the good and the sex. Okay. So when they get defensive, when they say, this person's my boyfriend or this person's my girlfriend, the child really believes this to be true. Again, they don't see the connection that the only reason they got that item was because of the sex. And that's the challenge. Exploiters also want vulnerable children. Now, we all could probably think of at least one vulnerable young person in our lives: a niece, a nephew, a neighbor, a cousin, right? Somebody you just worry more about than others for a variety of factors. Young people that have trauma histories are more vulnerable than others, right? Lack of healthy attachment. Mm, Maybe they're not living in a home that's really stable. There's substance use, mental health concerns. They've been placed from place to place by the system. And I don't want to ask anybody their age, but I'm 41. And even when I was a kid, there were no cell phones or computers. My kids think I'm archaic when I say that. Okay. I'm like, I'm not that old. So when most of us were children, you remember like stranger danger, right? Someone had to meet you on the street. Today, our kids have cell phones, laptops, you name the device, and the strangers come right into our homes. And now a predator, an exploiter, can be kind of trolling through feeds, looking for public profiles, right? Looking to find the kid that's posting things like, I don't have any friends. And they're not looking for an exploiter, but the exploiter will find them. Okay. And so today it's even harder to be a parent and to be a child because of the internet has really created this multi-billion-dollar industry. But we also have to kind of address the biases that exist. Sometimes when kids are commercially sexually exploited, they're brought into the systems, right? There are CRAs through the courts. They might become involved with DYS, so the locked facilities. They might start missing school, so they're labeled truant. And those are stigmatizing labels as well. The other thing is when a young person goes missing and returns, they're oftentimes not opening the door, wrapping their arms around their parents or the congregate care staff saying, oh, I'm so happy to be back. Oftentimes when they come back or return, because of all of the violence and abuse they've experienced, they're angry, they're exhausted, they're hungry. They don't have the words to articulate what's occurred. So what we get or what we see sometimes is verbal aggression, physical violence, right? Kind of pushing us out of the way. F you, I'm not going to get medically cleared. Why'd you touch my shit type thing, right? Like very angry. And our challenge in that moment is, of course, to first worry about safety. But then after we've kind of assessed for safety, we need to kind of unpack what's behind this change in behavior. This child has never acted like this before. They've just come back from being missing. Something else must be going on. Okay. And that second word, promiscuous, I touched on. Old school. In 2021, if I went into a high school and I asked a teenager, they'd probably say, this person or she has sex with lots of different people. And there's almost this understanding that it's consensual, that this person enjoys exchanging sex with all of these people. And another thing I want to hammer home is that in the commercial sex industry, there's never consent, even for a 17-year-old. I know that state law says at 16 you can consent to sex. In the commercial sex industry, because consent is not present, even at 17, you're seen as a victim of this crime. Okay. So just reiterating, terms like prostitute or promiscuous, super stigmatizing, not victim centered, and definitely don't convey a non judgmental approach. So, what are some of the forms of exploitation? Some of you remember the combat zone in Boston, right? Back Bay, Chinatown area. Well, back in the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, this is where you could visibly see prostitution at the time, right? Women on the corners in miniskirts, stilettos. You would see the pimps out there, strip clubs, peep shows, those old school posters of like the car parked along the curb with the woman leaning in, right? And so visibility did give a sense of safety to a certain extent. You know, some of the adults at My Life, My Choice that are mentors, will tell stories about working during the combat zone. Yeah. Shannon, I can see you, so I'm going to pick on you. I say to Shannon, hey, get his license plate, meaning make sure I return. Okay. Somebody hold their license. And so horrible things happened during the combat zone. But visibility was much more out there than it is today. Today, our children are exploited in an invisible world, meaning in most of our communities, you don't see young children out on street corners anymore. For people that don't understand exploitation or trafficking, they might simply say, well, it's not a problem anymore, right? If you don't see it, it can't be a problem. For me, the commercial sex industry is 1,000 times more scary now because our kids are posted up on social media, websites, pictures are taken, their names are changed. They're not taking a full frontal shot because they don't want someone to recognize that child. And so trying to find a child that's missing today is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Feeds are constantly being updated. And so it's become an invisible industry because of the internet. Stripping. Sometimes our teenagers get bright ideas. Right? Stripping. They'll say, it's an easy way to make money, Nikki. What's the big deal? I don't have to have sex with anybody. And they've gotten this bright idea from something they saw on TV or this famous celebrity. I think of Cardi B, who's a very famous singer, top of the Billboard charts. But Cardi B's story starts with a lot of trauma and at some point was a stripper for a long time. She sings about this in her music. For a teen that I'm working with, similar trauma history, they could look to somebody like Cardi B and say, wow, I can really identify with her, right? And look at her, she made it. And that's true, she did make it. But like 1% of people make it in the music industry, right? Our kids aren't playing the whole tape. And so, a fun fact, it's actually not a fun fact. Up until 2009, prostitution was legal in Rhode Island. And what that meant was 16-year-olds could legally strip in their strip clubs. A lot of the adult survivors at My Life, My Choice were children during that time and were being trafficked over state lines to the clubs out there. And so today, laws in Rhode Island have changed. But another sign you want to pay attention to is when you meet a young person that tells you they're hanging out in Providence, Rhode Island. No known family there, no known connections. And the reason that's a particularly important sign is that there's still a lot of strip clubs out there. Okay. And there's still, when they do police stings, we'll find Massachusetts kids up in those strip clubs. And so for me, I'm always paying attention to Providence. The gang-based exploitation. Well, gangs exist in a lot of the communities out there. And some of them, may be notorious for selling drugs or exchanging legal firearms or just violence in general. Some gangs or gang members have criminal records and they know if I get caught one more time with an illegal firearm or drugs, I'm going away for 20, 30 years. We've met young people that think it's cool to hold a bag of illegal firearms for a gang member because that means they've made it. There's someone. These people, I'm loyal to them, right? I have their respect. And what they're not thinking about is, no, they asked you to hold the guns because you wouldn't be searched, right? You don't have a criminal record. You're 15 years old. The other thing I'll say about gangs is they operate in fear, right? So a young person, yeah, might be getting things from them that their family can't provide. Maybe protection, a sense of loyalty, family, but you're also being exposed and witnessing illegal criminal activity, which means you're a liability. And it's when our young people become comfortable hanging in this environment. They're going to hotel parties, right? Being in places they have no business being, posting pictures on social media, throwing gang signs, wearing colors, thinking they're affiliated with this gang. And once they kind of drop their guard and they truly feel like these are my people, that's when things shift. Okay. If I'm a gang member and I get pulled over in a car and I have a known record and they run my license and they have probable cause to search my car, and when they pop the trunk, there's a kilo of coke in the trunk, I'm going to get arrested, right? The drugs are going to talk. But the chances that that 14 or 15-year-old girl sitting in the passenger seat, no marks on her face, she's not chained to the steering wheel. She's not going to say a word because she's more fearful of what this gang will do to her than the police. Okay. And so not all gangs are exploiting children, but some are. Because you can sell a person over and over again. You can sell a bag of dope one time. And the survival trafficking piece, this is a term that comes from research and literature, primarily focused on LGBTQIA plus youth. And what the literature really speaks to is that the predominant factor or reason why these young people are being trafficked is they've been kicked out of their homes because of their identity. Okay. So now they're experiencing homelessness. They have no place to sleep. They don't know where they're going to get their next meal. And exchanging sex to survive becomes the option, not the choice, right? And so just being mindful that for these young people, typically no third party adult exploiter profiting off the sale. It's young people learning from other young people how to survive. Okay. But it's a vicious trap because they've experienced systemic homophobia and abuse. Their own family has kicked them out. And so when nice service providers try to intervene, right, and tell them all the reasons why this is dangerous and unsafe and offer services, we're faced with all of the bad service providers before us and the parents that have ultimately told them, you can't be here. You're not part of this family. They figured out how to sustain themselves. Of course, it's dangerous, but it's just like they can't get out of this cycle. Now, the media portrays a very specific image of what human trafficking is, okay? Especially if you watch movies. There's a lot of them out there. I've seen Taken 1, 2, and 3. Love it, not gonna lie. Okay, but that's not what trafficking looks like domestically. Okay, a lot of trafficking movies are like that movie, very dramatic, forceful kidnapping, parents' worst nightmare, right? Biggest fear that my child's going to be kidnapped by this stranger and horrible things are going to happen. But if that's all we see and we know nothing else, we too might start to believe, well, that's what trafficking looks like in the United States. And I'm here to tell you it's not. Now, there are absolutely stories of young people that have been chained and handcuffed and tortured in basements and houses and apartments. And if those stories did exist in our communities, we would see them on the 5 o'clock news. Okay. What we're not seeing is the stuff happening in our own backyards. There's no chains, there's no shackles. The children being trafficked aren't all Caucasian. The majority identifies kids of color. Okay. When they come back from being missing, there's no cuffs, no nothing on their wrists and ankles. The police didn't drop them off, right? Something brought them back. So the chains have to be somewhere else. It's right here. You know, an exploiter's job is to essentially emotionally, verbally, mentally break you down to the point of becoming a physical prisoner. Most of these exploiters aren't hanging out in the hotels they're selling the girls out of. Okay. They don't need to be there because they know that the fear these young people have of if I try to run, if I try to steal their money, the consequences are going to be 1,000 times worse than if I just bring that quota tonight. Okay. And so those mental chains are what leads that young person out the door again. It's not the belief that things are going to be worse. It's that false sense of at the beginning in the honeymoon phase when it felt like a dating relationship, if I just would have did what they said, like this is all my fault. Federally, we didn't have legislation in the United States until 2000. So in 2000, the Trafficking Victims Prevention Act was enacted. This was the first kind of federal legislation to really lay the foundation for combating sexual exploitation of children in the country. It's been revised several times throughout the years. What this did was said that anyone under the age of 18, regardless of force, fraud, or coercion, should be seen as a victim. But there's federal law and there's state law, okay? I'd like to tell you in 2021 that all 50 states have universal protections for children. They do not. Only 34 states currently have safe harbor laws that are state specific to protecting our children. Massachusetts happens to be one of them. But we didn't even have this law until 2012, which is crazy to me. So, what that means is before 2012, young kids, 13, 14 years old, were being arrested and charged for sex for a fee and common night walking. But the buyers and the exploiters scot free, getting right off. Okay. So the laws have shifted. Children are not supposed to be arrested in the state of Massachusetts. They're supposed to be treated as victims. Anyone under the age of 18, regardless of gender or sexual orientation, should be viewed as a victim, which means for any provider that's a mandated reporter, we must file a 51A report with our local Department of Children and Families when we suspect this is happening. Suspect, low threshold. You have some early indicators or signs that I'm going to talk about. The young person flat out denies this is what's happening. You never have a disclosure. But as a mandated reporter, if you suspect this is occurring, your job is report it. That's it. What happens is this really cool process in Massachusetts. So we have 11 counties in the state. In every one of the 11 counties, there's a children's advocacy center in a district attorney's office. So in Massachusetts, when a mandated reporter files on concerns of human trafficking or labor trafficking, same laws apply for anyone under 18. The 51A report goes to the local DCF office. It also goes to the DA's office, the district attorney's office, and to the Children's Advocacy Center. At every Children's Advocacy Center, there's a CSEC coordinator, and their job is to pull together this multidisciplinary team of providers and the parents if they're involved, and the child if they're not missing, to say, how do we do better? How do we wrap services around this young person? That if they were to go missing again, we find them faster. But the goal here is penalties for the buyers and exploiters, services for the young people. Okay, so it's a huge shift in our state around how we work with these young people. So I'm going to pause for a second. I want to show you a video. It's about 3 minutes long. I also included the link in the email I sent with the handouts. What I'm about to show you is not graphic in any nature. You're not going to see pictures or videos of our children, but you are going to hear their voices. And when I say they sound young, and they would kill me now. They were like 15 or 16 when they made this, but they sound like babies. This video was made a few years ago when we had young people interview one another about how they met their exploiter or their buyer. It sets the stage for us to talk about the real problem, and that's demand, that people in this country still think it's okay to buy people. You will see images, but the images you're going to see are of My Life, My Choice staff, and you won't hear anything until the first picture pops up. So I'm just going to share my screen. Make sure that you can hear it.
Some girls, they don't have any choice. Like these pimps, they threaten you, they threaten your family, they threaten your little brother, your baby cousin, your nephew. A lot of girls that do have pimps, it's not fun.
Right.
You get your ass beat, you get your ass smacked.
Nobody wakes up every single day like, I want to have sex with a dozen of men.
Yeah.
Every single day, like for money that I can't even keep.
And as a young girl, we can't consent.
When I was first introduced, I was like 15.
I had just turned 14.
Like around 10 and stuff like that. A pimp never asked me my age. To me, it's like they don't care because to them, it's like we're money to them.
One was my uncle, and I was really close to him growing up, and I think he took advantage of that, and he introduced me to this guy. And I went because, that was my uncle, and the guy was like, you're gonna go make money for me, after we was like miles away in the highway.
I didn't exactly find him, he found me. I was on a bus on my way to Urban Improv, and he just hit me up, and I looked through his pictures and stuff like that. And one day we decided to start seeing each other, so we met up at Franklin Park, and we seen each other, and then we started talking about having sexual intercourses.
When a pimp first asks you your age and you tell them 13 or 14, they act like they're like, damn, really? Okay, well, you could start off by stripping. You don't need to have sex. And it's all bullshit. That's how they get you started. And once you're in that life, it's hard coming back out of it. He just looked like a rich white man. Like, he was clean. He had gray hair. His skin was mad pale. He just looked like a businessman. And like I could just see his hand till this day, like he was married. That stood out to me so much because it just shows you that anybody can come buy sex off of you.
I've been thinking lately a lot. I want to be like a detective, but for the drug unit. I used to say I'm gonna settle for something like cosmetology or mechanicing, but I feel like now I'm ready to become a drug unit detective.
I know this is like weird to say, like I don't know, not a lot, but I feel pretty. And I feel like I don't have to hide today. Like I want to speak up. Like I'm okay with people staring at me today.
I'm happy and excited because I'm about to graduate 8th grade. It's about to be late. And I'm passing on my terms. Well, my second term was C's, but now I'm working on B's. As a parent, give your child more attention. Like, ask them how their school days are going. And for preteens and teens, just because you feel like you're not beautiful enough, you are in your own way.
Thank you for watching that. Like I said, I think they set the tone in a much better way than I can. And I shared that link in the email I sent. Um, so from that, let's shift gears and really look at who's driving the commercial sex industry. This man's here on purpose. We'll talk about him in a second. I know he's not in the training, so it makes me feel better about talking about him. But when we look at the research that currently exists, the data out there around buying behavior, there is common themes. What we know, however, that demographics alone are not the best predictor of buying behavior. Beliefs and attitudes are much better predictors of buying behavior. We also know that most buyers don't buy sex one time and stop. Typically, once they've started, it's something they will continue to do over and over again. Demographically, most buyers represent someone that's white, at least 50 years old, making about 6 figures a year, married with children. Now, I want to stop and just say this is unsettling for lots of people. Somehow, some way, when we think of somebody like the creepy guy in the trench coat, it makes it easier to think about who's buying sex. I don't know who's in the space and where you all live, but I happen to live in Topsfield, Massachusetts. Couldn't get any whiter or wealthier than Topsfield. And realistically, based on just the statistics alone, I live in an area where some buyers might live. Now, that doesn't mean that all the men at Topsfield are buying sex, but if we look at the data, a lot of the men here fit within these categories, right? Why is that? Well, money and power drive the commercial sex industry. And when we think about people in our country that have the most power, being white and being male and making 6 figures a year provides you with more power, resources, and opportunities than most. Okay. I want to also stop and say, not all white men buy sex, right? Demographically, all different races and ethnicities have purchased sex, and not just people that make 6 figures a year. But when we think about who's perpetuating this industry, it's people with money, right? And so, again, what do we do about this? We have conversations. My Life, My Choice, we realized a few years ago to do prevention work and do it well, we needed men that were willing to step forward and say, we agree, men shouldn't buy sex. Not all men do. And so we created a male allies group. So if you know any men out there that are interested in doing anti-trafficking work and are willing to take a stand, that group, I'm not sure how often it meets, but it is led by men. They're not staff on My Life, My Choice. They're their own group as part of My Life, My Choice. And their goal is not only to become more educated, but to help educate other men. So if you're interested in getting more information at the end of this training, Shannon, if you remind me, I'll post the email of the person at My Life, My Choice you need to get in touch with. Who's at risk for being commercially sexually exploited? This to me is the more horrifying slide. Who? Why? All of our young people, not just kids in the inner city, not just children with trauma histories, right? We're talking all of our children. Why? Well, first of all, their frontal lobes aren't fully developed. So I don't know if you have teenagers. I do. They think they're invincible. Nothing can touch them. Nothing can happen to them, right? They get it all figured out. Or they know someone that's gone through something and they were fine, so they're fine, okay? Our kids also have these devices, okay? I can try to helicopter parent all day, doesn't matter. I can't match what's out there, and my children are going to be 5 steps ahead of me. So, access to technology, wanting more independence. My 13-year-old told me that his curfew this summer should be 11 o'clock at night. I literally laughed and I said, like, first of all, you're 13. And second of all, what do you need to be doing at 11 o'clock at night, especially in Topsfield when everything closes at 8, right? Like, probably wouldn't have anything harmful happen, but still, you're 13, okay? How many of our young people, especially when they hit that certain age, you can bring me to the mall, but can you like drop me off like at the corner, right? Like, we're good. Like, please, mom, don't embarrass me. Okay. Young people in care want this even more. They don't want to be around staff. They want freedom. They feel like they've lost those years of their teenage life. We might know young people at some point that have felt judged, that they don't get them, right? They're really lacking finding a good solid peer group. We meet kids with cognitive limitations, learning disabilities, and they're trying even harder to fit in. Kids want to be in love at some point. Mine haven't gotten there yet, thank God, but I know it's coming and it's around the corner. But when we think about all of these things, I can't think of one particular demographic that doesn't fit into this category here, right? All of our children are at risk. And when we live in communities that think, oh, that couldn't happen here, right? Not my kid. I'm more worried about your kid because you believe it can't happen, right? All it takes is friend requesting, messaging the wrong person. Our children don't believe the people they're talking to are exploiters, right? Our children believe whatever people tell them. You don't understand, but they're so nice. I'm sure they are, right? And so as parents, we have this wonderful job now because of technology, that not only do we have to think about the birds and the bees talk, but about technology and the dangers to the internet. It's not all bad, but it's definitely provided way more access to our children. Okay. So, how do exploiters recruit youth and turn them out? I want to stop for a second. The language I'm using is intentional. I said pimp earlier on to just make a point, but we really got away from using that term. Why? Because it's glamorized. Very much so in the media. And so let's call these people or refer to these individuals based on the behavior. They're exploiting individuals. And when we think about people buying people, you might have heard them referred to as Johns, which is a really anonymous term. There's millions of Johns in the United States, right? And it really allows them to kind of hide behind that name. So let's refer to them as buyers because that's what they're doing. And so being turned out means being sold for the first time. Now, My Life, My Choice, our statistics have not changed. 14 years old is the average age of entry for girls or those that identify as female. And 15 years old is the average age of entry for boys or those that identify as male. That doesn't mean we haven't had younger kids. Today, we had an assessment for a 12-year-old. And so what that means is when we think about children and when they're most vulnerable, it's like somewhere between 6th grade and 9th grade. Puberty's hitting, they're changing schools. Um, Kids are trying to figure out kind of who they are. And unfortunately, in the commercial sex industry, the younger a child looks, oftentimes, the more they'll be requested. So I mentioned force earlier. It's the tactic that scares us. It's that force. Usually we think of a weapon, right? A child being thrown into a van against their will. But it could be gang affiliation in today's world, right? This idea that if I don't do this, these people can harm me, my family, they know where I live. So that tactic isn't the most common, but it's the one the movies throw at us. Coercion is like old school blackmail. When that exploiter takes the time to figure out what makes that child vulnerable. And for every child, that's different. Okay. It could be their family struggling financially, right? They've kind of become parentified. They need to take care of all their siblings all the time because the parents need to be at work. It could be, my family doesn't have anything, right? It could be, they're really popular and their family has a prominent name in the community. And if somebody finds out about this, they're going to put this all on social media. So coercion's an easy one to do, especially because of the internet, right? A lot of us know young people that share too much information, thinking there's going to be no harm, or that why would this person use this against them? But that's exactly what coercion is. Befriending, look at the keyword friend. As parents and as a congregate care director at one point, I always paid close attention I come in the next day and these two kids that have never talked to one another, never wanted anything to do with one another, are now like this, okay? Um, they're asking to be roommates. They are like advocating for one another. And it does feel like an overnight friendship almost. And where it starts to get more concerning is when they start pushing away from old friends, things they cared about. And now they're very focused on this new person or group of people, maybe that are a little bit older, different peer group. Okay. Because a lot of our young people, one of the tactics being used by exploiters is to use someone of the same gender to recruit them. So when kids are going to school, or they're living at home with several siblings or in a foster placement, they're told, I need you to get me another girl. And their job is to look for the one that maybe is younger, maybe a little bit more, easy to manipulate. Maybe there's like a fear factor here. And to really sell this boyfriend of theirs. You can come stay with him. He'll take good care of you. Girl, we'll go to a party, to really make it sound like if this individual leaves with them, they're going to have a blast. That's befriending. Okay. And the last one is seduction. And we see this a lot with our girls. This belief that this much older man is the love of their life, and is going to take care of them in a way that they've never been taken care of. It feels like a relationship at the beginning. When I say years older, I'm talking about a 14-year-old dating like a 25, 28, 30-year-old. And we talk to our young girls about this. They literally talk about it like, what's the big deal? Right? Like, he loves me in a way that nobody else ever has. Not understanding that, number one, the age gap in itself is concerning. Like, why can't this 30-year-old get someone their own age? And so the defensiveness for the seduction tactic, whoo, these kids will tell you lots of places where you need to go. And this is not what's happening. And you're just jealous. And all of the other million reasons they've truly come to believe to be true. Okay. Especially kids that have been sexually abused. This belief of, at least it's not my uncle, right? Or at least it's not this person. Somehow this feels different, or feels like I have a choice. So signs and behaviors, and what I want to say before I go through these is that if a young person's exhibiting one, maybe not exploitation, but you want to pay close attention. When a young person's exhibiting a few of these, if you're a mandated reporter, you should file a 51A, okay? Again, if you suspect. History of being missing from care, running away, disappearing for the weekend. The parents have no idea where this young person is, and they pop back up on Monday. Like, everything's cool, I'm fine. Where did you go? Where did you stay? How did you eat, right? How did you get places? Especially if they've left with nothing except for their body, no backpack full of clothes. Like, who's facilitating this? It doesn't have to be a trip to Vegas. Visible signs of abuse, cigarette burns, curling iron burns. We all don't have to be doctors to know when something looks new or fresh, okay? Oftentimes kids will try to hide these, similar to self-harming behaviors. They don't want you to see it. It's easier sometimes in the summer when it's really hot to be more concerned when a kid is like fully dressed in like sweatpants and a sweatshirt when it's 95, never dressed this way. So we got to pay close attention to this one. Behaviors are consistent with PTSD, new behaviors, right? Kid just came back from being missing for a week, hypervigilant, head on a swivel, fearful of getting on that school bus, doesn't want to be in the community, resistant to activities that they didn't resist before, right? New stuff related to that child. What happened while they were missing? Attire dress is not appropriate. I'm not just talking about the child that leaves home in a miniskirt. And guess what? They're not going to do that because they're going to questions are going to be asked. I'm talking about kids that are leaving home or their program dressed quote unquote normal. They're not trying to have somebody ask questions. Maybe they have clothes in their backpack. I'm also worried about the kid that's upgraded their clothing and can't afford it. So who bought you those new True Religion jeans? How did you get those new Adidas that just dropped a week ago, right? That's the stuff I'm paying attention to. The new phone. If a child has the new iPhone 12, it's an expensive phone. There's a plan attached to that. If this kid's in congregate care, I assure you DCF didn't pay for that, right? A family can't financially afford to pay their rent. They're not buying this kid this cell phone. So who bought it? The tattoo is the big one. So Some of you may know young people that got a tattoo before they legally could, right? Meaning their parents didn't sign off on it. And here's the deal, you know about it because the kid bragged to you about it. Why? Because they're like, Shannon, you can't do shit. So here you go. And you kind of just have to like, yeah, there's really nothing I can do, right? That's not the one we're worried about. We're worried about the one that when you notice, that kid shuts down. You see a noticeable change in body language. They get really anxious. They try to pull the sleeve down or their hair. There's a lot of a shame attached to this tattoo. It could be the nickname of the exploiter. It might be the street name that was provided to the child. It could be a dollar sign, a barcode, a symbol, but something this child clearly doesn't want to talk about. Okay, that's the one I'm looking at as a red flag. If they were found in an area known for prostitution, they're found in a strip club, they're found in a hotel sting, you'll have kids say things like, I was just hanging out. Like, I have friends that do that, but I don't do that, right? And maybe there's some truth to that. But if you're hanging out in these areas, I'm concerned for your safety, right? If they were posted up on a website, OnlyFans or other types of websites, the child may or may not have knowledge of it, but there's a price attached for that picture or video. That's exploitation, okay? Language from the life. Well, this is complicated because in every community, there's different terminology for different types of things, right? But this is the best example I can give you. I don't sell drugs, but if I did, I would know all the street nicknames for it, the amounts, right? Where I could go, right? I'd know who my dealer was to get my stuff. And when kids know language or terminology and they say things like, oh, I don't do that, I'm thinking to myself, then how do you know what those words are, right? And so for me, some basics are the blade, the stroll, and the track. Now, those are just different variations of areas known for exploitation. And again, that changes from town to town. Daddy is never bio dad. Daddy is a common term used to refer to their exploiter. Wifey, wife-in-law, common terms used to describe other girls working for the same exploiter. Now, you can go on Urban Dictionary and go crazy with this. The point to this is you don't need to memorize all the words. If a young person you're concerned about is using language you don't know, ask. Don't pretend like you know. It doesn't make you cool. Ask. Frequently truant from school could mean lots of things that are happening, but coupled with some of this other stuff, my guess is it's out on social media that's what this kid is doing. Okay. Or they were exploited out of their school. So school's not safe anymore. Much older male, female person that they're dating, again, not 2 or 3 years, 10, 15 years older. The child saying that they are gang affiliated. If a young person has a history of multiple STIs, this is one of the saddest things for me. Young people not really understanding sex or how you get pregnant or get an STI, right? Because young people are being exploited at a really young age. This could be their first sexual experience. And they'll come back and we get them medically cleared. And they say with like all out honesty, like, Nikki, I didn't have sex. And I'm like, you have chlamydia. Like, and really trying to break it down that sex doesn't just have to be a penis and a vagina, right? And how do you practice safe sex? For some of these young people, they're trained to use a condom with buyers, but they're not using the same protection with their exploiter. Pregnancies and abortions, it's a reality of the commercial sex industry. And abortion is a form of birth control in the commercial sex industry. I'd like to tell you that buyers are unwilling to buy pregnant individuals. Does not stop some buyers, okay? Some young people will look on the web. How do I have a miscarriage? How do I have an abortion? Because they're fearful of telling anybody. Not knowing they have their own, reproductive rights, even as a young 13 or 14-year-old, okay? But really being cautious of valued or opinions around this stuff and proceeding with curiosity. Why does this young person asking about this, right? And not assuming they're consenting to having sex with lots of people. Maybe they're being exploited. Access to hormone injections, Botox, filler, kids buying really expensive makeup or binding because they are so desperately trying to pass in the gender in which they want to express. They don't feel like they can go to their family kicked them out. I can exchange sex to get those things. New friends, older teens or adults, they know very little information about, they're very vague. The truth is they probably know very little information, but these people kind of came out of nowhere and replaced all their old friends. I want to pay attention to that stuff and disconnecting from family or caregivers, especially if that was like their people, right? This kid was super involved in their community, sports, band, whatever. And now you're seeing this huge shift. Again, in Massachusetts, we are very fortunate. You can file on human trafficking, sexual exploitation of a child, in addition to labor trafficking of a child, on anyone under the age of 18. I want to make it clear you are not filing on concerns of the parent trafficking the child, unless, of course, that's your concern. In Massachusetts, you can actually file on an unknown perpetrator, which typically is the exploiter that you don't know the name of. Okay? In Massachusetts, DCF has to investigate these cases. That is why it's so important to check trafficking if that's what you think it is. The multidisciplinary team will be pulled together in your county, and usually within 48 hours, a call or a Zoom will be set up to get everybody collaborating to make sure we're not duplicating services or forgetting about something that could protect the child. The last thing I want to say before I open it for questions is we take survivor mentor referrals. We are one of the only providers in the Boston area that has survivors directly mentoring children. Now, in the Worcester area, there's a program called LIFT. They provide a similar service for children and adults. They also have a program for housing. In Boston, 18 plus individuals can work with the EVA Center, EVA. They also have an 8-bed group home. But we're one of the largest providers of mentors in Massachusetts. All 16 mentors are identified as adult survivors of the commercial sex industry, all of which were exploited as children. Most did not find their way out until adults. You can imagine how quickly these kids latch on to these mentors. It's like somebody gets me. If you know someone that's under the age of 18 that you think is at high risk or maybe has been commercially sexually exploited, even if they deny it and think they could benefit from having a mentor with lived experience, anyone can make a referral. It's up on our website. The most important thing is we need the guardian to consent to this, right? Because we can't just show up at a house and meet with a child without that consent. The biggest piece to know is the adults don't get to make the decision, the young person does. So if a young person is unwilling or doesn't feel like this would be a good fit, we listen to them because it's not going to be effective, right? And we're trying to give voice and choice back to our young victims. However, if the young person was referred before 18, an assessment was done, Shannon says, nope, not doing it. Shannon turns 18 and a half and she's like, you know what, actually, maybe that service would be really good for me. As long as that assessment happened before her 18th birthday, she can be matched. The other thing to know about our program is whether you identify as male, female, or LGBTQ+, you can be referred. And then lastly, our service does not stop at 18. If a young person started working with their mentor before 18 and wanted to continue, they can. And that's one of the greatest things about our program is the child doesn't lose that when they turn 18. So I'm going to stop share now just to see. That was a lot. And like I said, I did provide handouts, the link to our website and the video to staff at the Junior League. But I wanted to see if anybody had any questions, wanted to unmute or put it in the chat before we end today.
While everyone is figuring out if they have any questions, I have a question. So if you're not a mandated reporter, how do you go about reporting if you think someone's being exploited?
So you can, that's complicated, Shannon. Well, there's two ways. You don't have to be a mandated reporter to file. Anybody can file. You can file anonymously, but that makes it complicated because if the CSEC coordinator wants to reach out to somebody, they don't have your information because it was anonymous. But they could still move forward and try to get whoever else was involved with the child. You could, as just a citizen, call DCF and say, I want to file a 51A on concerns, and they'll connect you. You don't have to be a mandated reporter to file, and you can provide your information. That doesn't ever happen, Shannon, in these cases. I think sometimes people don't know what to do. Like, I'm in the community, I see this young girl, I'm concerned for her safety. Never intervene, because one, you could be wrong. And two, you could actually increase the safety concerns for that child. If there's police nearby, you can try to get them involved, but it's complicated. I think there is a National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They're a really great resource. There's a National Human Trafficking Hotline. You can call anonymously. But I think as non-mandated reporters, you can call and file and just know that's going into the DCF system. Most of the kids that are referred or have 51A files are in the system already. So this might elevate the concern of safety that another one's come in. I think the best thing people can do that aren't, social workers is to talk to people in their community. I try to have friends in Topsfield, so I don't lead with what I do for work. But when people ask and they're really interested to know, I don't scare them. I just talk about we have to have these conversations with our children. We have to acknowledge that this happens in communities and could happen here. And by talking about it, you're educating people, you're dispelling the myth that it's over their problem. And the more we educate the community and get people involved, the more prevention work we can do to hopefully prevent our young people from being exploited. Yeah.
Thank you.
No
And
problem.
I'm going to stop recording in case
Sure.
anyone has any